shaky. Shaky, baby.
I'm scared.
Keep shaking it. Did they pop?
Huh?
Did they pop or they just shot out?
They shut up.
In a quiet town known for its calm and friendly community, a shocking tragedy unfolded that no one could have predicted. A 17-year-old girl, brimming with dreams and potential, was shot dead in broad daylight, just a few feet away from where she had worked for months. It happened in a parking lot, a place where people should feel safe, but instead, this became the site of a horrific act that no one could have prepared for. The question echoed through the streets: why? What would lead a young life, full of promise, to be cut short so violently? This is the story of KeMari Childress, a teen whose hopes for a better future, her ambition to become a pharmacist, and her bright smile were all taken away by a single act of jealousy. In the blink of an eye, her life ended, and the community was left with unanswered questions. What drove this young man to kill? Was it a single moment of rage, or was there something darker brewing beneath the surface? Today, we're diving deep into the chilling murder of KeMari Childress. A story of heartbreak, jealousy, and a tragic chain of events that began with a breakup and spiraled into a deadly obsession. The kind of obsession that only escalates in the world of social media and toxic relationships. But behind every crime is a story, and in this case, it's one that deserves to be heard. Let's take a closer look at what really happened, how everything went wrong, and how a young girl's life was violently stolen from her. Before we jump into the details, I want to welcome you to City Crime Tales. This is the place where we bring you the true stories behind the headlines, where we uncover the truth and the emotional depths of each case. If you're someone who feels moved by the stories of real people and real tragedy, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on another story. Here we explore the cases that change lives, that make us think, and most importantly, that we need to remember. So, if you're ready, let's dive into the shocking and heartbreaking case of KeMari Childress. What led to her tragic death, the events that escalated, and the terrible consequences of unchecked jealousy and obsession. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. KeMari Childress entered this world on March 5, 2006, in Carbondale, Illinois. But her real story began to take shape in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. A small town with a community where everyone knows each other's name, Cape Girardeau became the backdrop for KeMari's bright, hopeful future. Raised by her mother, Jessica Fox, in a home where love was abundant and encouragement flowed freely, KeMari had everything a child needed to flourish. And she did, she truly blossomed here. Jessica, a devoted and loving mother, was KeMari's guiding star. She poured all her energy into raising her daughter, teaching her the values of hard work, kindness, and the importance of having big dreams. From the very beginning, it was clear that KeMari wasn't like most teens who were uncertain about their future. No, KeMari had a plan. She was determined to achieve something great. She wanted to help people, make a difference in the world. And her eyes were set on becoming a pharmacist. KeMari was more than just a student. She was a standout. Teachers knew her name because of her work ethic, her passion, and her ambition. But it wasn't just about getting good grades. KeMari was the kind of young person who wanted to do something with her success. She wasn't satisfied with just being average. She had big dreams, and she wasn't just thinking about them. She was taking action. Graduating early from high school, she stepped into adulthood with the kind of determination most people take years to develop. KeMari didn't just dream of becoming a pharmacist. She started working toward it. By the time she was 17, she had already secured a job as a pharmacy technician at CVS, right there in Cape Girardeau. For KeMari, this wasn't just a job, it was a stepping stone. Every shift she worked brought her one step closer to her dream. It was more than just an occupation. It was a real, tangible part of her future. She was learning the ropes of the profession, gaining valuable experience, and getting closer to the life she had planned. In her mother's eyes, KeMari was everything a parent could wish for. Smart, driven, and filled with potential, KeMari was on her way to greatness. She had a bright future ahead of her, a future that was slowly unfolding with each passing day. But sometimes, even the brightest futures are changed in an instant. Life doesn't always go the way we plan, no matter how much we prepare. But just as KeMari was beginning to carve her path, the world around her began to shift. The once clear road ahead was about to get a lot more complicated. What was it that suddenly derailed her plans? Was it fate? Or did it stem from something darker, something she couldn't have anticipated? KeMari had big dreams, but life, as it often does, had other plans. What was it that changed KeMari's life so dramatically? Was it an unavoidable twist of fate, or was there something in her circumstances that pushed her toward a much darker path than anyone could have imagined? Like many teenagers, KeMari found herself caught up in the whirlwind of love. It wasn't just any love, though. It was passionate and intense, full of promises and emotions that seemed boundless. Enter Trimene Jones, her first serious boyfriend. Their relationship was like something straight out of a romantic movie. Two young hearts finding each other, full of excitement and the anticipation of a bright future. Sweet comments on Instagram, constant posts with love hearts and captions about how happy they were, and pictures of the two of them together. Everything about their relationship seemed perfect, or at least that's how it appeared on the outside. For a while it looked like their love was a dream come true. There were romantic dates, heartfelt exchanges, and moments that seemed like they would last forever. KeMari was happy and so was Trimene. They shared everything, from inside jokes to late-night texts, and to the outside world their love was genuine, sweet, and promising. But as time went on, cracks began to form. What seemed perfect on the surface slowly started unraveling behind the scenes. KeMari had always dreamed of becoming a pharmacist, and her future was her priority. But as the relationship with Trimene deepened, his behavior began to shift. At first it was subtle, a text here and there, a call every now and then. But slowly, it became an overwhelming presence. Trimene's love seemed to morph into something else, something more suffocating, more controlling. The texts didn't stop. They became endless. The phone calls stretched late into the night, disrupting her peace. And then there were the unannounced visits, showing up at places where she worked just to check on her, just to make sure she wasn't doing anything he didn't approve of. What started as affection, what started as love, slowly morphed into a dangerous obsession. KeMari wasn't just being loved, she was being controlled. The more she tried to focus on her future, the more Trimene became obsessed with holding on to the past. He couldn't bear the thought of her moving on. His possessiveness grew more apparent, and KeMari began to feel trapped. It wasn't love anymore, it was control. It was manipulation. And for KeMari, who had always prided herself on independence, it was starting to feel more like a prison. KeMari, the ambitious young woman who had once dreamed of becoming a pharmacist, now found herself constantly battling her relationship with KeMari. The calls didn't stop, the messages didn't stop, the visits didn't stop. At first, KeMari tried to reason with him, tried to set boundaries. But no matter how many times she said, "This needs to end," KeMari didn't listen. His obsession with her wasn't just unhealthy, it was dangerous. He couldn't accept the reality of their breakup. Instead of letting go, he tightened his grip. At this point, the relationship was no longer about love. It was about control, about possession. KeMari had crossed a line, and KeMari, ever the determined young woman, started to pull away. She had to. Her future depended on it. She wanted to focus on her dreams, not be weighed down by someone who couldn't respect her boundaries. But the more she distanced herself, the more desperate KeMari became. KeMari's attempt to break free from KeMari's grasp became more than just a personal decision. It became a battle. A battle to protect her future, her independence, and her sense of self. The more she resisted, the more he pushed. The lines between love and control blurred, and what had once seemed like a fairy tale romance now looked more like a nightmare. But could KeMari truly escape this? Could she free herself from a relationship that had now become dangerous? The truth was, KeMari wasn't going to let her go that easily. Have you ever found yourself in a relationship where the lines between love and control started to blur? How do you recognize when love turns into something dangerous? And when should we say enough is enough? By early 2024, something shifted in KeMari's life. She had spent months fighting to balance her relationship with KeMari and her ambitions for the future. But as time passed, her focus began to change. She began to pull away, realizing that her dreams and goals, becoming a pharmacist, helping others, could not be ignored. KeMari made the difficult decision to end her relationship with KeMari. She was no longer willing to allow a toxic, controlling relationship to dictate the course of her life. She needed to move forward for herself and her future. For the first time, KeMari was fully determined to take control of her destiny. KeMari didn't take it well. In fact, he couldn't accept it. What KeMari saw as a step toward independence, he saw as an emotional blow. For him, the breakup wasn't just an end, it was a challenge, one he wasn't willing to let go of. His love for her, or rather his obsession, had grown so strong that rejection was something he couldn't process. The more KeMari pulled away, the harder he clung to the idea of them being together, to the idea that he could somehow change her mind. KeMari, on the other hand, had made up her mind. She started posting pictures online again, pictures that reflected her renewed focus on herself. She shared her work, her ambitions, her dreams of the future. Her posts were full of positivity, of a young woman who was ready to build a life outside of her past. But as she moved forward, her every post became a painful reminder for KeMari of what he had lost. To him, this was more than just rejection. It was a public declaration of his failure to keep her in his life. KeMari, unable to move on, couldn't let go of the idea that KeMari was slipping through his fingers. He flooded her with constant messages, each one more desperate than the last. He begged for her to come back, to reconsider, to give him another chance. But KeMari had made her decision. She didn't respond. Every message he sent was ignored, and the silence was more than he could bear. For KeMari, the rejection became a wound that only grew more painful with time. But the rejection didn't stop KeMari. It only fueled his obsession. His messages continued, more frequent and desperate, but KeMari stood firm. She refused to respond, refusing to fall back into the same toxic cycle. She had chosen her future, and nothing would take that away. KeMari, however, was not willing to accept it. His messages turned from pleading to angry. He began to lash out, calling her names, blaming her for the end of their relationship, and accusing her of abandoning him. The once charming boyfriend had turned into someone unrecognizable. What was once a love story turned into a dangerous obsession, and KeMari could feel it. She had no choice but to cut him out completely, blocking his number, cutting off all communication. But as KeMari began to refocus on her own life, her own goals, KeMari's obsession only grew stronger. He couldn't accept that it was over. The more he couldn't reach her, the more desperate he became. And this desperation would lead him to do something that no one could have predicted. KeMari had been trying to move on. She was diving into her work, focusing on her future, and surrounding herself with the things that mattered. But as she tried to leave her past behind, KeMari's obsession turned darker. No longer satisfied with just texting, he began to show up at places she frequented, desperate for a glimpse of her, a sign that maybe, just maybe, he could. For KeMari, this was no longer just an unhealthy relationship. It had become a dangerous situation. Her ex, the person she had once cared for, was now a threat, unable to move on, unable to accept that their relationship was over. She had to face a horrifying truth. The man she once loved could no longer be reasoned with. His obsession had become an uncontrollable force, one that she could no longer ignore. Could KeMari have just let KeMari go and moved on? Or did his emotional attachment cross a line, turning his once passionate love into something toxic and dangerous? How can we tell when a relationship is no longer just about love, but about control and obsession? But what followed next would escalate things to a level KeMari never imagined. After months of being overwhelmed by KeMari's texts, calls, and uninvited visits, KeMari decided to do something that she thought might finally give her some peace. In a moment of frustration and perhaps an attempt to regain control of her life, she posted screenshots of KeMari's desperate text messages on her social media accounts. What she didn't expect, however, was how this simple act would spiral into something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. What KeMari saw as a form of boundary setting, an attempt to show others how far KeMari's obsession had gone, soon turned into something much more explosive. With a few clicks, KeMari unknowingly set off a social media firestorm. The screenshots were shared, liked, and commented on, rapidly circulating across the internet. What she thought would be a simple way to express her frustration ended up humiliating KeMari in front of the whole world. At first, it seemed like KeMari's post was just another comment on a breakup, an act of setting the record straight. But the internet doesn't always work that way. In a world driven by likes, comments, and shares, Something that starts as a personal statement can quickly snowball into a public spectacle. KeMari's once private frustration was now an open invitation for the world to join in. People laughed at KeMari's desperate pleas, turning his vulnerability into entertainment. The very thing KeMari had posted in an attempt to gain control, her final act of setting boundaries, became a tool for public humiliation. The post quickly went viral, but not in the way KeMari had hoped. What she thought was a way to get her message across, to end the cycle, turned into something she couldn't control. What was meant to be a way to show the world what she had been dealing with became a public spectacle, one that led to a level of humiliation for KeMari that, for him, was unbearable. The comments were cruel, the laughing emojis poured in, and people didn't just criticize his actions, they mocked his pain. And KeMari had unintentionally given them the platform to do so. In that moment, KeMari had no way of knowing the magnitude of what she had done. To her, it was just a way to set a boundary, showing the world her ex-boyfriend's behavior so that maybe, just maybe, people would understand why she had to let him go. But in the harsh world of social media, humiliation spreads like wildfire. What started as a cry for help, an attempt to establish a boundary, turned into something that would push KeMari further into a corner. For KeMari, the ridicule was too much. He had already been unable to cope with the rejection, and now he was facing public mockery. His private pain was suddenly everyone's entertainment. What KeMari didn't realize was how deeply this public humiliation would affect him. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was humiliated on a global scale. To someone already struggling with rejection and obsession, this was the final straw. The psychological toll was immense. For KeMari, this wasn't just about losing a relationship. It was about losing his pride, his dignity, and his control over the situation. His sense of self had been tied to his relationship with KeMari, and now that bond had been ripped apart and publicly exposed for everyone to see. What had started as an attempt to move on from the breakup quickly spiraled into something much darker. But in this case, social media didn't just amplify the humiliation, it set the stage for a tragic turn. What KeMari thought was a simple way to set boundaries escalated into something that KeMari could not process. His emotions, already in turmoil, began to twist into something dangerous. The line between love and obsession had long since blurred, and now, public humiliation would push him to a breaking point. KeMari couldn't have known the consequences of her actions. She never intended for things to escalate this far. She simply wanted to stop the endless cycle of harassment, but what she didn't realize was how much damage public humiliation could do. Was she wrong to post the messages? Was it a mistake to turn her private frustrations into a public spectacle? The power of social media, both positive and negative, is undeniable, but in this case, it became a catalyst for a tragedy that no one saw coming. Was KeMari wrong to post those private messages? Could she have known how dangerous it would be to humiliate someone online? Could there have been a different way to set her boundaries, without risking the wrath of someone already deeply hurt? February 27, 2024. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just another ordinary day for 17-year-old KeMari Childress. She had just finished her shift at CVS, a job she loved. Every day at work was a step toward her dream of becoming a pharmacist. The small town of Cape Girardeau was familiar and safe. Nothing out of the ordinary seemed to ever happen here. But on this day, KeMari had no idea that she was about to become the victim of a tragedy that would forever change the lives of everyone who knew her. KeMari walked out of the pharmacy, a smile on her face as she left another successful shift behind. She had plans for the evening, perhaps to relax, catch up with her friends, or enjoy time with her new boyfriend. She didn't know that this was the last time she would walk out of those doors, the last time she would leave that parking lot alive. As KeMari made her way toward her car, everything about that moment felt routine, until it wasn't. What KeMari didn't realize as she walked toward her car was that KeMari had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to leave work. This wasn't a random encounter. It wasn't just a chance meeting. KeMari and his accomplices had planned this. They knew exactly when and where to strike. They had been watching, waiting for the perfect time to execute the plan that had been building in KeMari's mind for weeks. The red car appeared out of nowhere. It pulled into the parking lot, its tires screeching slightly as it came to a stop. The car positioned itself perfectly, blocking KeMari's way, preventing her from escaping. KeMari stopped in her tracks, her heart racing as she realized something was wrong. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she knew she was in danger. And in that moment, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Inside the car, KeMari sat in the passenger seat, cold and determined. His mind was made up. There would be no turning back now. The desperation, the anger, the obsession, it all led to this point. As the red car stopped, KeMari exited and moved toward KeMari with a sense of purpose. His every step was calculated, his every move determined. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was a planned attack, a premeditated execution of his growing rage. KeMari's instincts kicked in as she realized she was trapped. The door to her car, once a safety zone, now seemed like a cage. The parking lot, once a familiar, peaceful space, felt like a prison. She could see the figure approaching, KeMari, his face set in a determined scowl. Her heart pounded as she realized she had nowhere to run. She made a quick decision. She bolted. She didn't look back. She ran toward the CVS entrance, hoping to make it to safety. KeMari's sprint toward the doors of the CVS pharmacy was filled with desperation. She knew she couldn't outrun him forever, but she had to try. With every step, the entrance seemed to get farther away, the doors she had passed through countless times now seeming impossibly distant. She pushed her body to the limit, her breath short, her mind racing. She was almost there. Just a few more steps. But fate had other plans. KeMari, now close behind, pulled out a weapon. With one single motion, everything changed. The gunshot echoed across the parking lot, the sound deafening in its suddenness. KeMari had barely reached the doors when she was struck. She fell to the pavement, just feet away from safety. Her body crumpled, and the world she had worked so hard to build came to an end. KeMari lay on the cold asphalt, her life bleeding away in the very place she had worked so hard to build her future. The CVS doors she had passed through hundreds of times were now out of reach. She would never walk through them again. In a matter of moments, a young life, full of potential, was stolen away. As KeMari lay dying on the pavement, a 53-year-old construction worker, a bystander, was struck by a stray bullet. The violence that was meant for one had harmed another, an innocent man who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the true tragedy was that KeMari, with her dreams and ambitions, was now gone. KeMari and his accomplices didn't hesitate. They got back in the red car and sped away, leaving KeMari to die on the pavement. Her co-workers, The people who had watched her grow and had seen her excitement for the future rushed outside. They tried to help, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. KeMari was pronounced dead at the scene. This was no random act of violence. This was an act of revenge born out of obsession and jealousy. A 17-year-old girl's life was taken because her ex-boyfriend couldn't let go. He couldn't accept that their relationship was over. KeMari's bright future was extinguished in an instant, and the community, once so peaceful, was left to pick up the pieces of a senseless tragedy. What went through KeMari's mind as she realized she was trapped? What do you think she felt in that moment when escape seemed impossible? How would you feel if you were in her shoes, running for your life, only to be stopped by someone who once claimed to love you? Marion Jones, along with his accomplices, didn't just take KeMari's life, they shattered an entire community. His reckless obsession led to a senseless act of violence that's left many asking, what could have been done to prevent this? How could someone's inability to accept rejection spiral into such a devastating crime? This was more than just a tragic loss, it was a wake-up call for all of us. As KeMari's family continues to seek justice, we must remember her not just as a victim of violence, but as a young woman with hopes, dreams, and a future that was stolen from her. KeMari was just beginning her journey. Her story isn't just about what happened. It's a reminder of the real dangers of jealousy, the consequences of social media exposure, and the destructive power of obsession. This wasn't just a crime, it was a tragedy that could happen to anyone anywhere. And it should never have happened. KeMari's death is a heartbreaking reminder of the devastating effects of unchecked emotions and toxic relationships. It's a call to all of us to be more aware, more compassionate, and more protective of the people in our lives. As a society, we need to ask ourselves, what can we do to prevent tragedies like this? How can we better support those trapped in unhealthy relationships? And how do we make sure that the next KeMari doesn't become a statistic? What can we do as a community to protect young women from the dangers of toxic relationships? What steps can we take to stop tragedies like this from happening again? Let's talk about it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice could make a difference. Thank you for joining us here at City Crime Tales. If KeMari's story touched your heart, please share this video with your friends and family. You might not realize it, but you could be saving a life by spreading awareness. We can all do our part in preventing another tragedy like this one. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll continue to bring you in-depth, important stories that matter. Stay tuned for the next one, and until then, remember to stay safe. Everyone has a story. What will you do with yours?